When you think about huge global problems like human trafficking, what does it really take to fight back? Is it just governments, big international groups, or are there others, maybe independent players, making a real impact on the ground? Today, we're going to dig into one specific organization right in that fight, the Child Recovery Agency, the CRA.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we've got a collection of their own materials, documents straight from the CRA that lay out their mission, what they actually do, how they're set up, and their whole philosophy of operating. It gives a pretty clear picture from their perspective.
So, our mission today is to unpack what the Child Recovery Agency is all about, their purpose, their methods, how they operate. We want to pull out the key facts for you, things that might even be a bit surprising about how an independent group tackles such a massive challenge. Let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first. What is the Child Recovery Agency? The documents tell us the formal name is Silent Integrity, Inc. It's an Australian registered body, and it trades as the Child Recovery Agency. That's right. And their core mission, it's pretty direct.
Yeah.
Infiltrate and eradicate human trafficking. They specialize specifically in child sexual exploitation and trafficking, and that's on a global scale. What they really stress is their commitment to humanitarian principles. They say quite clearly they're not driven by politics or religion, and they've been at this a while, fighting on the front lines since 2010, is the phrase they use. Gives you a sense of their history here.
And important for you to know, they operate as a not-for-profit.
They also make a very clear distinction in their documents between human trafficking and people smuggling. This difference is pretty crucial to how they see their work. Trafficking, for them, is based on exploitation. It's an offense against a person, and it doesn't actually have to involve moving someone across borders or any transport at all. Smuggling, though, that is transportation-based, and it typically involves voluntary movement. So the key difference they point to is that element of choice or lack thereof. But, and this is important, they do acknowledge that line could get really blurry, especially, they note, in places like Southeast Asia. You can imagine, in chaotic situations, figuring out who chose what versus who was forced. It's not always simple.
That really sets the stage. So those are the principles. How does that translate into action? What services does the CRA actually provide on the ground? And I noticed for a lot of these, they repeat that motto. Even one trafficked child is too many. Really drives home the focus.
It does. And their services are, well, they cover a lot of ground. Starts with intelligence, gathering everything from human intel, signals, imagery, open source stuff, technical intel, right through to cyber and digital network intelligence. It's comprehensive.
So gathering information is step one.
Right. And that feeds into surveillance. We're talking electronic monitoring, video, photos, social media analysis, even aerial surveillance, plus old-fashioned human observation, all aimed at collecting solid evidence. Then there's reconnaissance, which is more active gathering of info about an area for a mission like physically checking out the terrain. And mapping, where they pull all that intel and surveillance data together on locations, environments, structures, basically to plan safe operations.
You mentioned aerial surveillance, and they seem to really lean into technology with their drone aerial services.
They do. They use advanced drones for all sorts of things. Real-time surveillance, mapping, recon, supporting search and rescue, thermal imaging, night ops, evidence gathering, even disaster support. And they explain why it's so important. They say human trafficking thrives in the shadows. We use technology to bring it into the light. It's a powerful idea.
Bringing it into the light makes sense. What else?
Well, the core stuff. Recovery rescue. That's what they call rescuing children recovery. It can be direct, where their own agents physically retrieve a child, or indirect, where their intelligence helps another group make the rescue. They also handle repatriation, moving children, often across borders, and extraction, which is getting children or families out of active war zones. That can be done openly or undercover. Then there's Safe House Services, funding safe places for rescued kids, which we can talk more about later. And finally, ACT training, which is training for other anti-human trafficking personnel.
Wow, that's an incredibly wide range of activities. It shows it's not just about the rescue moment itself.
Exactly. It's the whole chain, from finding the problem to dealing with the aftermath. It shows this fight needs intelligence, technology, direct action, and long-term support. It's not just one thing.
So looking at the scope, you mentioned earlier they operate mostly in Southeast Asia, but collaborate globally. Why the focus on Southeast Asia specifically?
Yeah, that focus is interesting. The documents mention the Lowy Institute's analysis connecting trafficking and smuggling there. They talk about these push-down and pop-up effects.
Push down and pop up.
Yeah, the idea is if you crack down hard on trafficking in one region, like, say, Europe, the criminals don't just stop. They pop up somewhere else with maybe less regulation, like parts of Southeast Asia. Or they might even shift tactics and try to move into wealthier countries, like Australia. It shows how interconnected it all is.
So it's like squeezing a balloon, the problem just shifts.
Kinda, yeah. And that's why things like the U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA from 2000, exist. It tries to create a global standard, with its tier system rating countries on their anti-trafficking efforts. CRI operates independently, of course, but these international frameworks sort of set the stage globally.
Okay, that makes sense. So we know what they do and where. Who are the actual people doing this work, these agents on the front lines?
They talk about Group 7. That's their Anti-Child Trafficking Special Operations Group, or ACT-SOG. And get this, most agents, they say, have over a decade of experience in this field.
A decade, wow, that's
Yeah.
serious dedication.
It really is.
Now, I was reading about recruitment, and the sources mentioned something called the 1% Club. Let's unpack that. What does that mean? It sounds incredibly selective.
It absolutely is. The 1% Club name comes from the fact that apparently only about 1% of applicants actually make it through the whole process to become a Group 7 agent.
1%? Seriously?
Yeah. First, there's intense vetting before they even get accepted for training. Then, if they pass that, there's basic operational training, then advanced specialized training, the vetting, the training intensity, the sheer difficulty and danger of deployment. It means very few make the cut.
That's quite a filter. It really says something about the kind of person needed for this.
It really does. It highlights the level of commitment, resilience,
Yeah.
mental and physical toughness required just to get in the door, let alone stay in it for years.
So with that kind of selection, what sort of training are we talking about? What prepares them for these high-risk situations?
They're trained by a group called Modern Defensive Tactics, Australia MDTA. MDTA provides specialized programs focused on high-risk environments and anti-human trafficking work. This includes things like physical response tactics, what they call high-resistance defensive tactics. Agents also typically hold a bunch of professional qualifications relevant to their roles. Things like Certificate 2 or 3 in security operations, maybe a diploma of security and risk management, being a qualified private investigator, crisis negotiator skills, undercover ops training, specific human trafficking investigation training, even things like a diploma of professional counseling.
Counseling, too. Interesting.
Yeah, makes sense given the trauma involved. And they note that where it's authorized under specific agreements, like an MOU with authorities, agents might also hold licensed firearms.
Okay. And who's leading this organization, the founder?
Right. The founder of Silent Integrity, Inc. And the CRA is Carl Thornton. He acts as the public officer, the president, and importantly, the head of missions and operations. His background is pretty relevant. Started in security bodyguarding, secure transport for high-profile people. But then back in 2010, he shifted focus entirely to fighting child trafficking. Since then, he's been directly involved, working as a contractor with NGOs and government agencies. He's even a contracted instructor for the Cambodian National Police, teaching anti-trafficking, juvenile protection, and investigation techniques.
So real hands-on experience at the top.
Seems so. The documents also mention some other key voluntary board members. Matthew Dyatt is vice president and head of intelligence and surveillance. Haley Wilkinson is the interim treasurer, and Sally Dyatt is the general secretary. All volunteers on the board.
Okay, so they're independent, not government-funded. Agents don't have police powers. This raises a really important question. How do they actually operate legally, and how do they fund all this, especially these high-stakes missions?
That's a crucial point they address directly. They state clearly they operate as an independent contractor. They work for law enforcement, government bodies, and NGOs, but they aren't part of them. They specifically emphasize they are not funded or directly linked with the Australian federal government or its law enforcement agencies.
Okay, so no direct government pipeline for money or authority.
Exactly. And critically, CRA agents have no law enforcement powers. No power of arrest. None. They're also not allowed to carry firearms generally. The only exception is if there's a specific formal agreement, a memorandum of understanding, an MOU in place with government and law enforcement authorities for a particular situation. They really stress their commitment to operating, quote, in a professional and legal manner. Which, given the work, you can see why that's paramount.
Right, but that brings us back to the funding. If they're independent contractors, not directly government funded, how do they pay for everything? The travel, the tech, the operations? It must cost a fortune.
It's a fascinating model, really driven by dedication. The core thing, volunteers. All the operational work is done by volunteers. Agents are not paid for mission duties.
Not paid at all for the missions.
Not for the mission work itself, according to the documents. Agents even cover their own personal expenses and the costs of their licenses. CRA covers training costs if it's at their own locations or provided directly by them. They state they never charge clients for their personnel time, and they don't add any profit margin. The slogan is, every dollar raised goes directly to the real costs of making a difference.
So where does the money come from then?
It's a mix. Sponsor contributions, direct donations from the public, specific fundraising campaigns, and sometimes agents actually self-fund parts of their work if needed.
Wow. And how is that money allocated?
They break it down. After covering fixed annual admin salaries, which they state total $31,200, the rest is allocated like this. 75% goes straight into missions, operations, and supporting the safe house or houses. 15% gets reinvested back into the CRA itself, aiming to grow their capacity and global reach. And the remaining 10% covers general admin costs. It seems like a very lean structure focused on the frontline work.
That volunteer and donation model is incredible, really underlines the commitment. Now, you mentioned safe houses a couple of times. Let's zoom in on that. How critical are these safe house services?
They're presented as absolutely vital. A safe house, in CRA's terms, isn't fancy. It's deliberately unassuming, inconspicuous, just a safe place to hide, shelter, or hold rescued children. The number one priority is keeping the children safe.
And you said earlier, sometimes the lack of a safe house can actually stop a rescue.
Yeah, that's a really stark point they make. The lack of available, secure safe house options can genuinely prevent rescues from happening. Imagine knowing a child is in danger, but having literally nowhere safe to take them immediately. It's a huge bottleneck.
That's sobering. So how does CRA handle funding these?
Well, they fund both long-term placements and short-term emergency accommodation. However, and this is a major point they raise, right now, due to a lack of consistent funding and sponsorship, they are not currently funding long-term safe house options.
No long-term options currently funded. That sounds like a massive challenge.
It does. They emphasize that short-term emergency options are always available, which is critical in the immediate aftermath of a rescue. But for real recovery and stability, that long-term care is needed. They give some figures too. The average approximate cost to house and care for one child in a safe house runs about US $500 per month just for the facility costs, and another US $500 per month for the child's living expenses, food, clothes, care, etc.
So about $1,000 a month per child.
Roughly, yeah. That works out to around US $36,000 for a 3-year term, and 3 years is the minimum placement period they aim for, though they say it's flexible based on the child's individual needs. And that 3-year period has a plan. Year 1 is all about physical, psychological, and emotional rehabilitation. Year 2 builds on that, adding education and skills training. And Year 3 focuses on setting them up for their future path, based on how the first 2 years went. It's a long-term healing process.
We have covered a huge amount today about the Child Recovery Agency. We've seen it operates formally as Silent Integrity, Inc., a nonprofit, fighting this since 2010 with a clear humanitarian, non-political stance. Their work is incredibly broad, from sophisticated intelligence and drone surveillance to the groundwork of reconnaissance and mapping, right through to the direct actions of recovery, repatriation, and extraction.
And the people doing it, the Group 7 agents, products of that intense 1% club selection and specialized training. Their dedication is obvious, especially given the volunteer nature of the work.
Absolutely. And we've touched on that critical, sobering issue of safe houses, how vital they are, and how funding challenges directly impact their ability to provide that crucial long-term care needed for recovery.
And it really highlights how, even though they're independent, not government-run or funded in that direct way, organizations like CRA play a significant part in tackling this massive global problem. Their specific structure, the volunteer power, the focused approach, it all contributes to the bigger picture, showing how different kinds of efforts are needed.
It certainly does. It makes you think. When you consider the specific costs they outlined, the incredible volunteer commitment needed just to keep these operations running, what other challenges, maybe even triumphs, are happening out there on the front lines for groups like this? Things that we don't get to see in the official documents, something for you to reflect on after this deep dive.